everyone, and welcome to another episode of UF Cast. Today we are going to talk about a hotly debated geopolitical topic, Greenland, and what is going to happen to it in the near future. We have seen a bunch of news. We're sure you have too. We are not really sure who to trust, what to believe, and what is the most likely outcome to happen. So we are joined here today by an expert who will hopefully guide us and you along through the thorny situation and try and get to a clearer understanding of the subject. Today I'm joined by Rida. Rida, it's lovely to have you here today. Can you please introduce yourself and our guest?
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Rida Khan and I'm a student of leadership in government sector. I am very happy to introduce Malin Isaksson here. Malin from Malmö University. She holds a PhD in Peace and Development Research and teaches at Malmö University. Malin, do you introduce yourself a bit and then we go?
Yeah, yes. So I'm a senior lecturer at Global Political Studies at Malmö University. And yeah, my speciality is the United Nations and particularly public international law. In particular, public international law that deals with conflict, such as the UN Charter, international humanitarian law, and international criminal law. And yeah, I am a historian to begin with, so I look at how the law was drafted and meant to function, and then I look at how it is used later.
I'm guessing there is a bit of a difference between those two most of the time, right?
Yeah, because states or the international community adapts constantly in relation to, what is perceived and possibly also is new threat to security. So there is leeway in the interpretation of the law. But very often, sometimes, it's very contrary to how it was supposed to function.
Mm. But before we talk about what's happening in Greenland, we need to take a step back and just take a brief look into its geography and history. How did Greenland, a place with fewer people than many towns, but the land bigger than many countries, become so important to world politics today? Greenland is the world's largest island, located in the Arctic between North America and Europe. Although it's geographically closer to Canada, Greenland has long been politically connected to Denmark. It was a Danish colony for more than 200 years, and that history still shapes its political system today. In 1979, Greenland gained home rule, and in 2009, it moved even further towards self-government. This means Greenland now controls many of its own internal affairs, like education, healthcare, and natural resources. But Denmark still handles things like foreign policy, defense, and currency. Greenland is home to about 56,000 people. The culture, language, and identity of the population are deeply connected to the land, the climate, and the indigenous traditions. At the same time, Greenland faces modern challenges, from economic dependence and climate change to questions about independence and global power interest in the Arctic. Now, with melting ice, opening new shipping routes, and access to natural resources, Greenland has become increasingly important on the global stage. And that brings us to the political debate we are seeing today. Yes, so we, from students' perspective, would begin with to understand the scenario. So my first question is from an international law perspective, how should we understand Greenland's relationship to Denmark today?
Well, I think that you can understand it very much in relation to, the purpose of the United Nations as an organization, because one of its main goals is self-determination. And as the UN was founded, one of the big things was also the decolonization process. It even had a specific body called the Trusteeship Council, whose work was to decolonize all the former colonies. And so you can say that Denmark as a state it's very much following that path, but maybe a little bit later than if we look at Asia or Africa, for instance. And particularly as of late, I think it was in 2008 or 9, I think, that Greenland gained quite an extensive autonomy and self-determination within the Kingdom of Denmark, so to speak. And today, there is a path towards independence if Greenland themselves wants to become independent from Denmark. So from that perspective, and I guess a classical perspective, that some territories of the world that were formerly colonized or were formerly colonized but are still within the territory of the state gets some autonomy. Successions into independent states today is quite unusual because states don't want to lose territory. But if the Greenland and the Greenland Parliament votes, or first a referendum amongst the population of Greenland, and then the Greenland Parliament votes yes for independence, and then the Danish Parliament also says it's okay, then Greenland will become independent.
When you talk about Greenlanders, what their stance is, or where they stand, how do you think the media representation of Greenland or the Arctic shape public understanding? What should be done to understand, like, the local perspective much more, because that is not very publicly known?
No, it's not, and maybe it's because it does not necessarily make a good news story. Because journalism in itself, and particularly how it's reporting on international issues or armed conflicts or war, is driven by conflict. So those who are in conflict are the ones that are represented. So in this case, the Danish Prime Minister and Donald Trump is the one that is mostly featuring and the kind of fight they're having. And very often also it's always indigenous populations whose story is untold for a variety of reasons. And if they are represented, it's often in relation to very stereotypical understandings of them. For instance, in relation to, social issues that might be facing. In many indigenous populations, like if we take Australia for an example, often the news stories is about, alcoholism amongst the Aboriginal population, criminality and things of that nature, because that is also then a conflict or something that sells, or today newspapers or people, don't click on those types of articles. And as they are, you could say, the minority in all of this, even though it's their territory to decide over, they are the least interesting to feature in news stories, unfortunately. So I guess that is the question, but what does Greenlanders want themselves that is kind of missing from all of the news reporting?
What do you think people could do, normal students could do to inform themselves more outside of, as you said, the sort of boxing match between big powers in the media, because that tends to get the biggest coverage? And also it's super hard, as you said in your introduction, to actually understand what the core issue is, or what actually is going on, and who has the right to Greenland or not, or why Greenland is important. So I guess old-fashioned way, read a book. No, but do deeper research a little bit in relation to what's like behind all the buzz that is there, to try to
maybe read up a little bit in relation to why Greenland became Danish to begin with, and the different deals that Denmark has had with the United States on Greenland in relation to security and military bases, and just try to dive a little bit deeper into to really understand what the issue is all about. And I must say, maybe I have not been so good at that myself, but yesterday I actually went to the US State Department and actually read up upon the UN foreign policy in there. They have a long, I don't know how many pages, but quite a lot. And then read up about what this, Monroe Doctrine actually is, like the new version of the Monroe Doctrine that is a former US security policy in relation to Latin America and the decolonization of Latin America. And now read up about what that actually say and become a bit more informed, because...
Can you give us a quick summary what the Monroe Doctrine is and the new Donroe?
The Monroe was in relation to the US wanting to secure the Americas, both North America and Latin America, from European influence. And being the US being a former colony themselves, they were very much for a decolonization process and to not let Europe have its old influence over the Americas. And I guess the Donroe Doctrine is, and then that Monroe changed depending on security, the security situation. And of course, since then, and particularly since the Second World War, the US has been Europe's closest ally. And the Donroe, can we say, is then a kind of revamping of the Monroe in relation to what sphere of interest that the US has, and also to a little bit keep Europe out of US business, but also the US shifting its focus to their own neighborhood, so to speak, rather than focusing on Europe and what goes on in Europe. And because of China and Russia and the very importance of the Arctic and the very important position of Greenland there as the kind of big landmass for passage, you could say, then Greenland becomes important in the US to secure, not from Europe, but from Russia and China, that they identify as the biggest security threats to mainland US. So that is what that is all about. So from that, maybe it's easier to understand. You don't have to like it or think it's okay, but if you read up a little bit in relation to that, you might understand the US government a little bit better in relation to how they are reasoning in relation to Greenland and to the rest of Latin America, and maybe why a little bit Venezuela becomes so interesting in that, and Colombia and other states as well.
Speaking of Russia and China, I have seen many news articles saying, quoting Donald Trump as saying that there are Chinese and Russian interests, great interest in Greenland and a security risk to Europe and America. But is that true, or is there any weight to this?
Well, to be quite honest, I don't really know if there's any truth to that. But if we then look at international politics more globally, and what might be China's aims in the Arctic, so possibly not so much as like right now, because Russia is preoccupied with the war in Ukraine, And yeah, China, I don't really know what China is up to, but it's also in relation more for China to secure the South China Sea that is more strategically important for them when it comes to, you could say, non-violent conflicts over the seas or waterways. But possibly so. And the Arctic has been on the agenda for some time, and trying to collaborate in relation how to deal with the Arctic. And let's say that all the ice would melt on Greenland, then the interest will become much, much greater, because it has, I think, apart from Venezuela, Iran, one of the biggest sources of oil underneath all that ice and earth, and also other important minerals. But as of now, they cannot be harvested because of the ice. So as of now, maybe not so much, but in the future, who would know?
When you touched upon Second World War, how do you think, since World War II, Europe has pretty much handed over their entire financial system, security, and digital connectivity to the US? In this case of alliance breaking, where do you think, how does EU see this, or how does it sustain itself?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that first of all, Europe hopes for, in 3 years' time, another US president that will be more in line with, how the US was from the Second World War up until now, seeing the importance of Europe and the alliance with Europe. But of course, I think that, I think it's a scary situation for European leaders and for European countries, particularly as it opens up for Russia if the US completely leaves Europe on its own, in a sense. And that is, of course, dangerous. And it's particularly dangerous for Europe if it means that, that NATO is no more, because European powers needs, the military might of the US in certain situations. So that is a protection that Europe have been counted for a very long time. And I guess that's why you see in many European countries that when it comes to in the budgets, that military spending is increasing immensely due to that, because the realization that maybe we will have to defend ourselves. It is tricky for Europe to have him become so dependent.
How well equipped is the UN today to deal with these conflicts that combine both colonial legacies, climate change, and great power competition?
Well, of course, being a teacher that mostly teach in the UN and in all the legislation that is attached to it, just before the semester started, I thought, well, maybe this in a few years will be a history lesson rather than a lesson in relation to the UN. But the UN can only be as strong as its member states lets it be, because UN is not, it consists of states, and states are sovereign, and they completely decide for what they want to do and when they want to do things. And from that perspective, now both international law, when it comes to international relations, and the UN is not having the best of times, and it becomes problematic when the biggest state, the US, and also US having a veto power, but more importantly, the US actually is the state that is pretty much funding the whole organization. And when then the US budget is severely cutting down on UN funding, that makes the organization weaker. And then it can also lead to a kind of a snowball effect when other states do not want to pay the bill to the UN either. And that means that it kind of can also break down from inside. And unfortunately, when big states are acting outside of public international law and are acting outside of, in this case, the UN Security Council, that are to decide in issues like this, that, the system kind of breaks down or is not so effective as it could be on paper. And and that becomes more dangerous for smaller or middle-sized states that are more dependent on collaboration.
So it has become like a tug of war between power and justice.
Yeah, very much so. And the danger is that when one permanent 5-member state start to do things that outside the charter, then that becomes a state practice. So it's easier for other states to be able to do so again, because they see, oh, well, hey, that was possible. So we can also do this. And a little bit this kind of breakdown in relation to a war of aggression, which is pretty much an invasion war, a little bit started in 2003 when the US went outside the UN Security Council and invaded Iraq. That is a war of invasion, very much so. That led to the confidence for Putin to take Crimea first and then launch the war on Ukraine. 9 years, was it 8 or 9 years later?
Yeah.
And now here, Donald Trump
setting a pattern to just follow the footsteps.
So
Talking about US right now, when Trump suggested like buying Greenland, it sounded a little bit more like absurd idea. But in the past, we have also seen such patterns. What do you think? Like, what does this show about?
No, but at one stage I cannot even open the computer and click on some newspaper and read, because it's like too much. It is absurd, of course, because territory and its population cannot and should not be for sale. So you think, what is this? Are we back in the Middle Ages, or is this Game of Thrones where we can just sell something off for a few bags of gold or something? But I think that comes from that, and I don't remember the year now, but also when the US were in talks with Denmark in relation to Greenland. I don't know if... No, I'm not going to say a year, and it's completely wrong. Something for all the listeners to look up, I guess. No, but then what is today the Virgin Islands in the US was the former Danish colony in the Caribbean that the US actually bought. And that was in relation, you could say, to the Monroe Doctrine, that to secure, and particularly then the Panama Canal, which is very important for the US. And so then kind of Denmark got to keep Greenland and did not have to sell it. And I guess that is what Trump then, maybe he has read a book, maybe he's actually read the Monroe Doctrine, I don't know, got briefed on it. And then that thinking that, let's buy that. And maybe that is possible, but of course it's not possible. And it's absurd, but of course very offensive for Greenland and its inhabitants. So no, it sounds absurd because it is absurd. So but it's always sort of kind of hard to interpret what he actually means. Is this a way for him to bargain with Denmark in relation to new military bases there or whatnot? Who knows? Or maybe he even thought it was possible. I guess it is how nice you want to be when you are trying to interpret him. So yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah.
Over the latest Davos Financial Summit, we have seen a bit of a de-escalation of the conflict, at least publicly, but the issue does not seem to be going away. What can we expect for the future if this continues to be a persistent issue? Could we see a breakdown in the niceties between countries, let's say, between alliances? What can we expect? Maybe a shift in attitude? What are the most likely scenarios going forward?
The most likely scenario, I think, is that the Danish government and the US government will broker some kind of new deal in relation to more US military presence on Greenland to open up or reopen or rebuild new military bases. I think that is the most likely scenario, and that is also what I hope. And of course, the worst case scenario is that the US actually, militarily somehow intervene in Greenland, and then, well, that becomes difficult for NATO, and it will be no more NATO. What are the other NATO states going to do in Europe? Are they then going to act on collective self-defense and come to Denmark's rescue against the US? So, I mean, that is a complete breakdown, and I don't think that is something that the US are interested in, and most definitely not European states or other NATO member states. But I think that also the scenario is that Europe will, instead of being nice and kind and a little bit sucking up to Donald Trump that have done previously as a way of thinking that is how we will get him to do what we want if we tell him how great he is. So maybe now instead a little bit more, playing a little bit more hardball with him in relation to standing up for Europe, and maybe also try themselves not to become so dependent on the US is probably what we will see.
Do you think this stance, like standing up for Europe, can also mean standing up for the rest of the world sometimes against him?
Well,
So maybe
I'm just thinking in other like conflict situations where the Europe or the US often.
This is what I meant too, like when troops were sent to other countries.
Well, I think that if we take the ongoing conflict on European soil, if we take Ukraine and Russia, I think that in that case, it's not so much that other European states needs to stand up to the US, but that possibly they need to take more responsibility in that conflict somehow. And what that is now, I'm not so sure what that's going to be, because it's a lot of weapons and a lot of money already pumped into that conflict by Europe. And of course, Europe doesn't want to make any concessions in relation to Russia when it comes to Ukraine territories, to Donetsk and Luhansk, that should become Russian territory again. So that is like a very core question. But I'm not sure what Europe actually could do about it if, let's say, Ukraine feel pressured enough to end the conflict, to actually give those territories to Russia. And when it comes to the situation in the Gaza war, or the ceasefire that is there now, I think that there seems to be winds blowing in Europe in relation to being more open in relation to Israel's conduct in that armed conflict. and France and has now recognized Palestine. I think the UK was about to recognize Palestine as a state, which is a clear breakage from being loyal to the US and US position in relation to that conflict. So, yeah, maybe it will be a change there as well. I'm not sure, because that is such a sensitive conflict in relation to where to stand and what position one is to take. And unfortunately, in all this, it's like the Palestinian civilian population that no one seemed to care enough about to actually do some proper or take some proper actions.
Circling back to international law, what are the, at least theoretical, actual consequences that are in the drafted up charters, in the documents of these organizations? Because just as a civilian, let's say, as a layman, I have seen Europe especially using financial deterrence, distancing themselves from countries and breaking off financial deals as a way of punishing behavior that they do not like. What are the intended consequences other than financial ones?
Well, the UN Charter in itself is often called the law of peace, because it's primarily there to prevent war from breaking out between its member states. And when it comes to the UN's functions in relation to economic issues, that comes very many pages into the Charter, and that is handled by the Economic and Social Council of the UN. So in that sense, the UN does not have any financial might in that sense to change things. And when it comes to sanctions, that can either be decided by the UN Security Council to sanctions a state or individuals of a state that are perceived to be breaking international law. For instance, if it's grave abuses of human rights, for instance, that then sanctions can be decided upon. But states themselves as being sovereign, because that is the main principle, you could say, of the UN Charter, that every state is sovereign in the sense that they are to decide over their own internal business, how they are to be governed, and all those sorts of things, but also in relation to the territorial sovereignty, that they have a right to defend their own territory. But so what that means is that sanctions can be, a state can individually sanction another state if they want to. And the EU being an organization, then it's many, when decisions of sanctioning is taken by the EU, then it's that international organization. And of course that have more might, because it's all the EU states that then cannot, make deals with those who are sanctioned or with the state that are sanctioned. So by being peace law, the idea is then that sovereignty is a principle of peace, because if no one meddles in anyone else's affairs, well then there will be no armed conflict, and that is what the UN Charter is set out to prevent. And together with the principle of sovereignty, the most important article is Article 2.4, which is the prohibition of violence. It forbids other states to attack other states. So that is how peace are to be kept. And then it's only the UN Security Council that have the right to make decisions in relation to threats to international peace and security when force might be needed, or in Article 51, when states have the right to self-defense if they are attacked by another state. So that is like that are mainly what the UN Security Council are dealing with. Then other things is more soft issues, like what the General Assembly is doing and what other UN bodies are doing. It's more soft issues in that sense, that it has about with humanitarian issues or with development issues. Because during the drafting process of the UN, states were well aware that we need to also, to prevent war, make sure that individuals' basic needs are met. Because if they feel like the basic needs are met, they are less likely wanting to go to war. And hence we have the Marshall help, for instance, in relation to Europe, where a lot of money was pumped in to rebuild Germany and rebuild Europe, so that Germany would not, as after the First World War, wanting to go to war again. So that's how they see that to create peace, not only does state are allowed to do whatever they want inside their own territory, but they need also to be developed. They have to have, a happy population, so to speak, not wanting to go to war to gain more territory that might have natural resources or whatever it might be.
Thank you so much for such we got a glimpse of the history, what the current situation is. As we are directing towards students, the mole is to educating students. What do you think? If you have to advise future journalists or future podcasters covering topics like Greenland, Trump, or Arctic geopolitics, would you suggest some types of questions? Should the students should be asking these questions today?
Maybe not what question they should ask, but if we return to what we talked about at the beginning in relation to maybe try to find those whose stories are never told, what's in the dark, what do we never get to hear about, what are their views or experiences in relation to in this case for Greenland being a big pawn in international politics. So think to dig deeper and maybe ask, find those whose stories are never told, because I think, that is going to enlighten, I think, even more. And of course, in relation to this, also put a face on those people that, in this case, people are fighting about.
Thank you so much for this podcast. Lovely having you here. We could dive deeper into Greenland, its history, and the power dynamic.
Thank you so much for today's discussion.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Let us know, dear listeners, if you want us to cover more topics like this. And you can do so by following us on Instagram, Spotify, and YouTube.
You can also mention what more topics you want us to cover.
We want to listen to you who want to listen to us.
Yes.
Until next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.